To the Olive Press. I'm Emily Bacon. I know it's been a little while since I've recorded. It's been a crazy couple of months, so I am excited to be back, especially the day after Mother's Day, and I am joined by the beautiful Rebecca Long. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so this is going to be a little different than the normal style that we normally do. We normally do conversational, but Rebecca's going to read her testimony, and I will ask her questions at the end. So,
All right.
if you want to take it away.
All right. Yeah, just to let everybody know, I'm pretty nervous. So, and all through my paper, I wrote, slow down and breathe, and hopefully I won't read those words out loud. And
whatever is the most comfortable for you.
Yeah, okay. And I just, it has been written several times and rehearsed, so I hope it doesn't sound stilted, but whatever God wants. So, whatever, I hope that he's able to use this, to help people, and that's why I'm here. So
awesome.
All right, so I just start with I was born in 1965 in Eugene, Oregon, but my family moved to Sacramento when I was just 6 weeks old. I have 8 living children and 4 babies I miscarried. I have 3 sons and 5 daughters in that order. 4 are married, and I have 7 grandchildren. And just also so everybody knows, my kids will have okayed the podcast before it goes public.
Perfect.
So, we want to mention there are a lot of links in the description, which I would love for you guys to take a look at. Neither Emily or I get any money if you purchase using these links. They are just my recommendations. One reason I wrote this is I don't feel like I think well on my feet at all. If you talk to me in person, you'll know that. I also tend to speed up when I'm nervous, which is most of the time when I'm talking to people. So I like to blame, and I kind of joke that some of my mental insufficiencies are because of a non-fatal drowning I had when I was 4 years old. So it was actually Good Friday in 1970, right before my 5th birthday, that my mom found me on the bottom of the pool. She pulled me out and started screaming at the top of her lungs. A neighbor called the police and thought she was being killed. So the ambulance came, and then once my dad got to the hospital, the doctors sat my parents down and told them that I was in a coma and that I would most likely die. That if I did live, they should prepare themselves to put me in a care facility, as I would have all kinds of brain damage and never speak or walk again.
Wow.
My parents called their parents and my brother and sister, who are 12 and 13 years older than I am. They also called their closest friends, who would later become my step-parents. I'm sure there were people praying, although my parents were agnostic. My mom later became deeply involved with the New Age movement. My sister had been dating a devout Protestant and had been going to a Protestant church and taking me with her. She was about 17 at this time. Years later, my sister told me that when everyone was gathered around my bedside in the hospital, she said to me, "Honey, if you wake up, I will take you to church on Sunday in your new Easter dress." And she told me my dad said, "Well, if she wakes up, I'll go to church with you." I turned to my dad sitting next to us and asked if he went, as I had only known him to attend church about 10 times during my then 39 years of life. And he replied, "I sure did." I woke up from the coma about 8 hours later, and I looked around the room, saw everyone there, and sat up and said, "Hi!" with a big smile on my face. Very recently, I had a Facebook friend tell me she considers this a miracle. She is a part of a support group for moms with children who have had a non-fatal drowning, and said my recovery is pretty much unheard of. I had kind of figured my recovery was due to doctors not knowing much back then, but she said there hasn't been much improvement in care or outcomes from in the past.
Wow.
So, did you want to read that?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I normally ask this at the end, but did you become more like your mom when you had children?
Yeah, so I wanted to start with this question because I feel like moms, especially for girls, have a huge influence, for better or worse, on who we become as adults. It has always been my goal, as soon as I can remember, to try and become as opposite as my mom as possible and more like my stepmother. My mom was part of the early feminist movement, and her career and self-fulfillment what was the most important to her. She never wanted to have children. My dad had told her he was infertile, as that is what the army had told him because of the conditions he had been exposed to during World War II. She got pregnant on her honeymoon with my sister, and my brother was born 16 months later. I was a surprise baby 12 years after that, and was in full-time daycare from the time I was 3 months old. My sister was the one who generally took care of me after school. Soon after I turned 5, my mom decided she wanted a different life and walked out. When discussing this time with my brother... Oh, sorry, I'm going to start crying already.
No, that's okay.
All right.
That's okay.
Okay, when discussing this time with my brother as an adult, he told me my personality flipped at that time from being very happy and outgoing to being very shy and extremely quiet. My sister soon left after for college, and my brother ended up having a huge fight with my dad and moved out on his own at 17. So for the next year and a half, it was just my dad and I. Then my dad got married to my stepmom, and I ended up with a stepsister 11 months younger and a stepbrother 3 years younger. About a year after that, my mom married my stepmom's ex-husband, and my step-siblings became my double step-siblings.
Wait, okay.
Yeah, so I thought you might want me to repeat that.
Yeah, so
So my mom and dad were married,
okay.
and their best friends were married to each other.
Yes.
And they all split up, and my dad married my stepmom first, and then her ex-husband a year and a half later married my mom. So my
they
siblings,
switched.
they switched.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but my stepmom heard me say traded one time, and she had a fit. She's like, "We didn't trade."
Yeah. Who said that to her?
I said that.
Oh.
I was like, "My parents traded."
Yeah.
She's like, "No, we didn't."
Oh my gosh.
But
That's crazy.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
They switched.
Wow.
They switched.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
So every Friday to Saturday night, because I was with my dad and my stepmom, we would go visit their dad and my mom.
Okay.
But once in high school, we really got too busy to visit very often.
So you guys would all just come. Was that awkward? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to ask questions.
No,
at the end, I
that's
guess.
fine. You can ask. We were so young. So I was about 5.5, 6 when my dad married my stepmom. And I used to be in the store and say, "She's pretty, marry her, Dad." After my mom left, you know. And like any lady, she might have been already married, but and then my stepsister was just 11 months younger than me.
Okay.
So she was about 5, and then my stepbrother was 2, I think.
Yeah.
So we just kind of grew up that
Wow.
way. We knew our story was unique.
Yeah.
But,
Totally.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's awkward at weddings,
Right. Yeah.
Everybody's there. Yeah. So, but anyway. Back to the script.
Yeah.
I've always tried to model myself after my stepmom. I owe a huge debt of gratitude and love to her for how she raised me and her example of selflessness. She was born in Trinidad. Her parents moved to the States when she was 17, and she became a naturalized citizen at 18. She was a stay-at-home mom who dedicated her life to raising us and to creating a beautiful, happy home. She told me she hated it when we would visit our other set of parents, as she worked hard all week to make us a family, and then felt like she had to start over every time we came home. No. She was raised Methodist and would take us to church every Sunday. When she married my dad, he was an alcoholic and still suffered from PTSD from being on the front lines during World War II. I don't think anyone ever really recovers from that. He was also very briefly a POW. Through my stepmom's influence, he gradually stopped drinking. She was the type of mom who our childhood friends would come to for advice with their problems. I think because she was home and available, the neighborhood kids would play at our house most of the time. She also often had homemade cookies for everyone. The kids all felt comfortable coming to her. When I was 39, I watched my stepmom take care of my sister during her final days of battling cancer. A year later, my step-grandmother, her mom, also died in her care after being on hospice. And then 5 years later, it was my dad.
Your stepsister, you said?
No, my biological sister.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So she took care of my biological sister.
Wow.
Yeah, and my sister was out of the house, when they got married, but this was my stepmom. She was just,
right.
We all adored her.
So wonderful, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then my dad was 15 years older, so...
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And then my mom was 7 years older than my stepfather.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Anyways, so I was able to be with my stepmom and my dad his last weeks, as my boys were home from college at that time and could care for the younger siblings while my husband was at work. My dad died Christmas Eve in 2009. 3 weeks later, I would have my fourth miscarriage and go through a very dark depression lasting about 6 months. My stepmom's example is what made it possible for me to have the confidence to move my own mom in with us June 2020 after she fell and broke her hip at age 91. I had a nanny job at the time, and my youngest, who was 16, was able to step in and take over, and later her older sister was also able to step in and take some hours. My mom passed away in my home February 6, 2021.
Wow.
So I met my husband Jeff in 1983 when I was still in high school. My best friend at the time, Sherry, picked me up from my home in Camino, also known as Apple Hill, and drove me to an Assembly of God megachurch in Sacramento on Easter Monday. Jeff was interning there. He wanted to be a pastor and was at the back running the book cassette table. I thought he was 30 because he already had a receding hairline, but he was only 23. After I graduated, I moved to Sacramento in with my sister, her husband, and my niece, and started attending that church. Every Monday night was Singles Alive night, where about 300 singles came together to sing praise songs and to listen to about an hour of preaching. After the service, we would break into groups, usually of about 20 or so, and go to a restaurant. One night, about 3 years later, I was about 21, ended up being only Jeff, Sherry, and I. I was engaged at the time to a young man in the Army, but he was on a TDY in Germany. I had been dating him for about a year. I think I was stunned anyone would want to date me, is that I had an extremely poor self-image due to my parents' divorce. I latched onto the first guy who came along. There is a book by, I think it's pronounced Leila Miller. Have you heard of her? Or Layla Miller?
Is it Leila?
Yeah.
I think it's Layla.
Layla Miller.
Yeah. I haven't actually.
Oh, okay. Titled Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. And it does an excellent job of describing the damage divorce has on children. It's mostly interviews.
Is that a link in the...
Yeah, there is a link in the
perfect.
description. Yeah, and it's also free online too.
Okay,
and it has a foreword by Cardinal Sarah, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Very
I think
cool.
I wrote that in the... Yeah.
Awesome.
So, after that dinner with Jeff and Sherry and I got in her car, and as she was my ride... And I turned to her and said, "Wow, Jeff is so in love with God." She immediately responded, "You should be dating Jeff." It took a while, but I eventually broke up with my fiance, and about a year later, I started dating Jeff. After we were engaged, he told me he used to pray when seeing me in church. "Lord, even if she never goes out with me," he was attracted to me very soon after we met.
Yeah.
"Even if she never goes out with me, please don't let her marry that guy." Jeff could see a lot of red flags that I didn't see. The man I was dating was also from divorced parents and also an adult child of an alcoholic. Our trauma combined in marriage would have been a disaster. Jeff and I were married June 27th, 1987, when I was 22, and babies started coming a year later. We were part of a Protestant movement that taught even using NFP was a lack of trust in God and should not be done. So we had 5 children before we entered the church in May 1997. Our conversion was entirely due to my husband constantly seeking the faith where he could sign off on every one of the required beliefs. This is the reason he never became a pastor. He couldn't find that church until he found the Catholic Church. I had thought I was marrying someone who was going to become an Assembly of God pastor. It's a good thing he didn't, as I think I would have been a terrible pastor's wife. I am not a natural leader or a person who likes to be in the limelight. When Jeff and I first got married, we were very idealistic. I remember Jeff saying, "I want our marriage to be an example of Christ's love for the church." Little did he know what he was getting into. Not that he was perfect, but I came with a lot of baggage. In all the essential things, we were on the same page. We shared the same faith and entered the church together. I was actually convinced of the truths of the church before he was, though he started studying before I did.
Oh, wow.
And I was longing to be able to go to confession and receive Jesus in the Eucharist. Our Protestant church had so ingrained in me that I had to follow my husband in all things, which is not the teaching of the Catholic Church regarding faith and morals, that I waited for him to be convinced. Our Protestant church kind of treated women as second-class citizens, and the Catholic Church was a breath of fresh air to me in how much respect and honor they give to women. First, I think that comes out of a devotion to Our Lady, and then there are the female doctors of the church, and then all the female saints. Anyway, I didn't have to wait but a few months for my husband to finally be convinced, although this was after both of us studying for almost 2 years. Neither of us wanted to become Catholic. We came into the church very reluctantly. A friend gave Jeff the book Jesus, Peter, and the Keys, as the authority of the Pope is what was holding my husband back. This was actually someone who now attends St. John's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Shout out to that person.
Yeah. After reading that book, there wasn't anything left to do but convert to Catholicism. The book that convinced me a few weeks before was Born Fundamentalist, Born Again Catholic.
Oh.
Jeff and I both knew we wanted me to be a stay-at-home mom and homeschool. We had both been bullied in school, and in high school, my husband had gotten heavily into drugs. He had come from a great family who were very involved with their children. They were always at the school supporting different activities and were also very involved with their Lutheran church. When he was young, Jeff and his dad were part of Indian Guides, which is like Boy Scouts, only the dads always attend with their sons. My husband often mentioned how this developed a special bond between them. But my husband had a very charismatic junior high school teacher, science teacher, who recommended books to the students. My husband bought and read these books, and these books led to other books. And some of those books made him start questioning his Christian beliefs. He eventually read some books that advocated using drugs for enlightenment. As soon as he got into high school and those drugs were available, he started using them. My husband was always reading. There were 20 to 30 books in his car at all times. And we got to the point where we had to make a rule to always call each other before purchasing any Catholic book, because we started bringing home duplicates. When I was in 5th grade, I started developing much earlier than all the other girls and was teased terribly for it. I started slouching and trying to disappear as best as I could. I still have bad posture to this day, although I have tried to work on it. One particularly bad day, when I was having trouble holding back the tears, I asked to be excused to the bathroom. As I was coming around the corner, I bumped into an 8th grader. I kind of knew him, but not very well. He saw my face and asked what was wrong, and I blurted out, "No one likes me." And he replied, "Well, I like you." And then he gave me a big hug. That one act of kindness made the rest of the year bearable. I can't remember his name, but I always pray for him when this memory comes to my mind. Seemingly little things can make a huge difference. I'm sure that young 13-year-old boy would be shocked to learn I still remember that moment 45 years later.
Wow.
And so if you're listening, please, you can share this story with your kids, and especially if they're in public school, let them know they can be very powerful for good. So just last week, I met a young man at St. John's who had come back to the church in just the past few months because he met some Catholics when he moved up here who were kind to him.
Wow.
And invited him to get together with them, and then later invited him to Mass. He said their kindness and authenticity are what brought him back. St. Catherine of Siena said, when we live out God's love for each other, we change the world.
Can I say something in that same vein?
Uh-huh.
My brother was extremely devout.
Mm-hmm.
He was an altar server at St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
And because of treatment, like negative treatment towards him, because he went to public school, he left.
Well,
He's not fully gone, like obviously you're always going to be Catholic no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he will start practicing again fervently, but that is so important to highlight, that your actions are so, you can kind of tell I'm a little bitter about it, so incredibly important.
Right.
And so the treatment of anybody, regardless of if you know them or if you don't know them, can make or break a person. And I pray that he comes back. I pray that he finds people that are nice to him. But to treat someone differently because they have a different type of lifestyle than you.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be political. Like,
no.
I'm just saying,
I
like,
understand.
to treat someone that's trying to be Catholic and loves Catholicism, or even, it doesn't matter if they're Catholic, just like treat everybody with respect.
Right.
And understand that everybody has their own battles, And so anyway, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That hit me really hard, that it's just, it's so important to just understand that your actions are perceived by people, and that can affect them for the rest of their life, from that story itself.
Yeah. And I would add, I'm not good from speaking,
from
the script, but I want to add that we, I think we also have to look at ourselves, because sometimes we're just having a really bad day. I remember one time I went into the grocery store and I was like, where's my son? He was working there. Yeah. And to pick him up. And they're like, oh, I think he's in the back. I said, could you please tell him to get in the car? And I was just exhausted. Right. And the coworkers went to get my son, and they're like, your mom is so mad. What did you do? I have never seen her so angry. Yeah. So my son gets in the car, and he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, what? What's wrong? I'm like, he said, yeah, they said you were angry. I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm just really tired. Yeah. So I think also a little forgiveness and to people that are I agree with you, because I know that I probably have come across to some people like as not very friendly sometimes, and you're like distracted with kids or you're grieving or you don't know what's happening in somebody's
I think giving
mind.
people I think in general, like giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think when it boils down to it, just give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and see the best in everybody, regardless of how they're acting or who they are.
So, okay. So, back to script. Sorry. It's okay. No, you can interrupt. It's totally fine. I just want to let people know when I'm going
off script. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jeff and I were also completely committed to our marriage. I never wanted to put my children through what I had gone through. We did go through some fairly rough times, though. I went through a depression after every miscarriage, especially the last. And we also had very different ideas about money, which also caused some difficulties in our marriage. It took 26 years to get on the same page about how we spent money. I highly recommend to everyone to take Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace classes, which made it possible for us to be out of debt and have enough money to pay the medical bills when my husband passed away. When you take those classes, do take them prayerfully, as he comes from a Protestant background. I know Dave Ramsey has updated the classes over the years, so I am not sure if there's anything that goes against Catholic teaching or not, but it is always good to practice discernment. Also, at one time, he was against having life insurance. I highly recommend both husband and wife have life insurance. It's so very important.
I agree.
Yeah. My husband and I were invited to attend a Latin Mass about a year after we came into the church. I was 8.5 months pregnant, and there was only one time available, which was at 1 p.m., and it was a very hot April. I hated it. And what was up with all the veils? I couldn't follow the missal as I was trying to control my 19-month-old and my 4 other children. Well, Jeff kept going, and I would go to the new Mass, and we would trade off taking care of the youngest children. He always took the older children to Mass with him, though. Eventually, we got an FSSP priest and 2 Masses at 2 different parishes, and my husband convinced me to go back to the traditional Latin Mass while he watched the kids. The homilies are what kept me going, and then the reverence is what made me stay. After attending for several months, we had to attend a new Rite Mass one Sunday, and that's when the difference in reverence really hit me. And I love wearing my veil now, especially now that I understand all the symbolism behind it. It also helps me focus on the Mass and prayer, and it hides tears, which I have really appreciated the past 19 months. We did have an initial honeymoon period when we first entered the church, but I slipped back into some old habits of thinking soon after my 6th was born and my sister's cancer had come back. I remember one confession soon after I started attending the TLM, and the priest asked me to pray the Memorare. And I'm like, the memo what? I should have told him I was a fairly new Catholic, but I didn't. He said, you know, the one that starts, remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary. And I said, no, I don't know it. He sighed and gave me a different penance. When I got home, I decided I better learn that prayer. And when I got to the part of the prayer that says, my mother, I burst into tears, because it was then that I realized Mary is my mother. In 1999, I started praying for a spiritual director, and very soon after, a new priest was assigned to us, and his very first homily was on having a spiritual director.
Wow.
It was like God was saying, here he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. My friends may not believe this, but I was extremely introverted, insecure, and a shy person at this time. For 2 weeks, I sat by the phone crying and begging God to give me the courage to call this priest. The next Sunday, I remember praying during Mass that I would have the courage to talk to him. And right then, Father announced that all boys who wanted to be altar boys come talk to him after Mass. Well, my 3 boys got super excited. They were all over 7 about signing up. So when we went up to him after Mass, because they drugged me, I also managed to ask if he would be my director. I remember our first meeting when he said, I can't direct you if you don't talk to me. He started off doing all the talking.
Yeah.
I was so nervous. He ended up being my director for 5 years until he was transferred.
Oh.
He was very instrumental in getting me to truly believe God did love me. I became so in love with God that love spilled over to my husband, my children, and everyone I met. Those first 2 years of direction were one of the most peaceful and joyful times of my life. One of the first books he assigned me was Story of a Soul by St. Therese, who I had taken as my confirmation saint, though I had only heard one homily about her.
She's such a goodie.
Yeah.
I love that lady.
Yeah, the homily was about like how she could just even pick up a straw for our Lord, and I thought, or sweep the floor. And
right.
I thought, oh, well, I can sweep floors.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy because Sorry to interrupt
No,
again.
that's okay.
Like I just finished Story of a Soul.
Right.
And reading it, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's so simple. You know, it's like anybody can do it. Which,
Right.
you know, you think about all these amazing saints and all the amazing things they did, and you're like, how am I ever gonna get there?
Right.
And then I'm reading this, and I'm like, what? It's that easy? Like, you just
Right.
offer everything up to God with
Yeah.
love?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's easier said than done, of course,
Right.
especially, I mean, if you're
Right.
dealing with a screaming baby,
Mm-hmm.
you know, things like that. But it was amazing to hear that from such an amazing saint.
Right.
You know, just,
Right.
she's so wonderful. I love her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think God, you know, like, just gave her, because I was told, like, the week before, you need to choose a confirmation saint.
Yeah.
Like, I don't hardly know anything about any of them.
I feel like
And-
saints choose you
Yeah.
a lot of times.
Yeah.
Like Saint Philomena chose
Yeah.
me, definitely. I mean,
Right.
patron saint of blood disorders, patron saint of babies. I mean,
Right.
come
Yeah.
on. It's like the iron. It's so just, God builds this beautiful tapestry, and
Right.
you can see it throughout your life, and it's just so
Yeah.
magnificent.
And Saint Therese is so that anyone can be a saint. And I think I would totally, if I hadn't read her book, or I would be in despair of
Yeah.
ever becoming a saint,
Right.
or even like
Right, totally.
Yeah. So I hope that would be awesome to be a saint, obviously.
Yeah, right. That's the
But-
goal.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? So I remember about 5 months after starting spiritual direction, that my then 4-year-old came up to me with a picture she had drawn with a big smile on my face, and she said, "This is you, Mom. I want you to write 'Mom is happy' on it." And I realized she hadn't seen me happy in a long time. I still have that picture. Things became more difficult after those 2 years, as God doesn't leave us in consolation for very long. My sister died of cancer in 2003, and we were very close. Then the priest was transferred in 2005, and I fell apart. I had become too attached, a mistake I would repeat 2 more times. So the new priest came in, and I had a conversation with him, because my priest before encouraged me to see if he would direct me. And so soon after he arrived, I talked to him, and I completely clashed with him. I decided I could not stand him. The problem was, I had already gone to confession to him and thought he was an amazing confessor. So I avoided him every time I saw him, so he would not know my voice in the confessional.
Oh.
And I kept going to confession to him. And his homilies were awesome. And eventually I asked him for advice outside of the confessional. And then he became my second director.
Oh, wow.
So, and I cried a lot when he was transferred too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So after he left, he and the new priest, they both together made it possible for me to attend a week-long trauma therapy, which was very helpful in recovering from my childhood traumas. There's a link to that therapy. I didn't get as attached to the new priest, but was upset enough to where, when he was transferred, to where I promised myself that I was not going to be getting attached to any more priests.
Yeah.
That mindset worked until Jeff entered the hospital, and our pastor stood by our side day in and day out for the next month. And he frequently checked in on me after my husband passed away. Anyway, a lot happened in 2010 to 20 and up to 2020. Kids graduated from high school and college. Some got married. Grandchildren were born. In 2012, Wonder Bread, the company my husband was a delivery driver for, declared bankruptcy, and my husband lost his job. Having never become a pastor, he had worked various jobs gas stations, carpet cleaning, and many years as a magician and a clown
What?
for an entertainment company. Yep.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome.
People always thought I was joking when they asked me what my husband did for a living, and I replied, he's a clown.
That is amazing.
The problem with the clown magician job is he had to work all day Saturdays and Sundays, and that became more difficult when we became Catholic. And then the job with Wonder Bread became available. When they went under, my husband got his CDL and became an over-the-road semi-truck driver. He would leave every Tuesday morning and return late on Friday nights. When COVID hit, I was actually grateful for the lockdown. My husband still had to work, but the lockdowns meant he had nowhere to go on the weekends.
Yeah.
He was always volunteering for one thing or another at the parish, and we were both fairly social and hung out for hours after every Sunday Mass. But ever since we were first married, all I ever really wanted was more time together with him and to be home together more. At that time, we only had our youngest at home. All the rest had moved out. The three of us spent a lot of time gardening and playing board games together, and we did a little bit of hiking. I wasn't resentful of the time my husband spent volunteering, as we both loved our parish, and I was later repaid 1,000 times over while he was in the hospital and after he died. June 2020, at age 91, my mom fell and broke her hip. I didn't want her going into a nursing home as she had dementia, and I knew she would deteriorate much faster in a home, and there were people with COVID at every single one. One of my children was pretty upset by this. She commented that my mom had not taken care of me. Why would I take care of her? I told her it's just the right thing to do. We don't leave family out in the cold for the mistakes they have made. And that goes for parish family members too. We did leave St. Stephen's for a few months over being hurt sometime around 2013. But the pastor at the Byzantine parish we started going to sent us back. I am so grateful for his advice, but also grateful we got to meet him. The experience gave us another confessor we were comfortable going to. For those who don't know, Catholic Byzantine parishes are in communion with Rome. Anyway, taking care of my mom was all-encompassing. She couldn't walk to the bathroom by herself and would wake up almost every 2 hours to go. It was completely exhausting. As the lockdown was lifting for the world, we ended up in an even greater lockdown to protect my mom. My husband would come home every weekend and do all the shopping and the cooking for the entire week so I could focus on my mother's care. Jeff's favorite verse was St. Mark 8:34. If any man will follow me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Jeff lived that verse. I put it on his gravestone as it summed up his whole life after his conversion. My mom passed away February 3rd, 2021. I'm glad I had that time with her to get to know her a little better. Sadly, there wasn't enough of a relationship there for me to grieve a loss. I pretty much grieved from the time I was 5 until I entered the church and took Mary for my mother. After my mother died, it was just my husband and I, as we had sent my youngest out to visit her brother in Maryland for a couple of months. I was so grateful for all Jeff had done. I fell in love with him all over again, and the next 6 months was a really grace-filled time. We did have one argument that turned into a pretty funny story. My 5th child, my second daughter, was getting married in Denver. On the drive out, I kept getting more and more tense and upset as my husband kept yelling at the other drivers on the road, who were making him upset. After the trip was over and we were on the way to the park for one of my grandson's birthday, he started doing it again. I asked him, "Can I please do the driving on the way to Idaho?" Our next trip was just a month away. He was pretty upset about me asking, considering he's a professional driver, but finally asked, "Why? Why do you want to do the driving?" I told him, "I can't take you yelling at the other drivers. Can't you just pray for them instead? This is one reason I rarely call you while you are working." So about 10 minutes later, he quietly says, Lord, teach that person how to change lanes. And on the way home, he says, Lord, help that person learn to use his signal. And then, Lord, please teach that person not to use his cell phone while driving. And when we are about home, he asked me, why haven't you commented? And I replied, well, you weren't yelling, so I didn't really notice. So it's working. He always prayed for the other drivers from then on.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good advice. I should start doing that, I think.
There were so many miracles that happened the last months of my because before he got sick and then after. Last months of my husband's life. First, my daughter was playing with my husband's phone, I think in July. She was 17, and figured out his passcode just for fun. So he changed it, but then he forgot the new one and locked himself out. It was such a hassle to unlock it that he didn't put another passcode on it. For everyone listening, make sure your spouse has your passcode. I never had it. There were so many phone numbers I didn't have, and I wouldn't have had if he had another passcode on his phone. There were texts and phone calls that I had to answer. I used my own phone so people wouldn't think he was calling when he was in the hospital. One person called after my husband had passed away who was just trying to catch up. If I hadn't had access to the phone, he would never have known what had happened. And later, he ended up in the hospital with COVID. He called me because he couldn't come to the funeral. And he said, I'm in the hospital with COVID. And I said, would you like a priest? And he was Catholic, but hadn't been to church for a long time. And he said, yes, I would like a priest. And I was able to get him a priest.
Did he end up passing away?
He actually came out of the
good.
hospital. Yeah, no, he recovered.
Wow.
So when we were in Boise, our trip to Idaho was Boise and then up here to Rathdrum. My husband asked to stay an extra day visiting with his sister instead of heading up here. I knew my husband's job was dangerous and there could be an accident at any time. He had had close calls before. So of course I said yes, thinking in the back of my head, this could be the last time he sees her. We then headed to our friends in Rathdrum after spending an extra day. Every morning, the family we were visiting would say this prayer from the Missal during their morning prayers. O Lord, my God, from this moment do I accept from thy hands, with burning love and sincere contrition, with a calm and willing disposition, whatsoever death thou shalt choose to send me, with its pains and griefs. And we prayed morning prayers with them. I believe this was a grace from God, preparing my husband for what was to come in the next weeks. By the time we returned home from our trip from Idaho, we were both sick with the Delta variant of COVID. I was sick first, and about 4 days in by the time we arrived home. When it came time for him to go to work, he was 3 days in and feeling much better. He decided to go to work. I tried to talk him out of it as I said I was better on day 3, but much worse on day 4. He replied, but I have a much better immune system than you do. The problem with my husband's job is that once you leave, it takes 4 days to get back. By the time he got home, he was extremely ill, and on the 7th of September, I dropped him at the emergency room door as they wouldn't let me in. They had to wheel him in as he could no longer walk. We had called the priest about an hour before as we knew it was hard for anyone to get into the hospital. I should have called earlier as after an hour I couldn't wait any longer to take my husband. Our pastor spent hours upon hours calling people at the hospital, and even a message went out on the email for anybody that worked at Kaiser to try to fight his way into the hospital. He was finally able to get in a couple of days later. Originally, the nurse was only going to let Father give my husband a blessing from the hallway, but the father talked the nurse into letting him go in, so he was able to give my husband last rites before he went on the ventilator on the 13th. This is a huge comfort to me to know he was able to receive this while he was awake.
Yeah.
Before my husband went on the ventilator, he told the doctor to do whatever you can. I had a family member ask, why did he leave us? And I was able to explain that it wasn't his intention and that he did everything he could to stay. Every Thursday, the doctor would tell us we would have a new doctor for the weekend, and then another one on Monday, another new one. He told us he was never reassigned to the same patient. Somehow, he was reassigned to my husband all 4 weeks he was there.
Wow.
We developed a very good rapport with him, and I hope our faith had an influence. He especially connected with my 29-year-old son. I knew and trusted that this doctor was doing everything in his power to save my husband. We also had a weekend doctor towards the end that was very, very compassionate. So on the 13th of September, when my husband went on the ventilator, my 29-year-old immediately got a ticket to fly out from Maryland. My 23-year-old daughter got leave from her job and flew in from Southern California. My 19-year-old happened to already be in town, helping out a friend who had just had a baby. My 2 oldest sons live in Sacramento close by. I had 6 of my 8 children with me right away. On the evening of the 14th, I called for an update on Jeff, and they told me my nurse was on break and would call back. She took a long time to call back, and I started thinking there was an emergency and my husband might be dying. I started praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and at the same time telling our Lord how much I wanted to be there, and could he please put me there somehow spiritually. After I finished the chaplet, I couldn't wait any longer for the return call, and I called back. I said, I'm Rebecca, and I'm calling for an update on my husband. And the very first words out of the nurse's mouth were, I saw your husband's scapular, and I prayed the rosary for him, and I will pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet for him next.
Wow.
And I immediately replied, you are my miracle. Peace just descended over me like a flood, and I knew that whatever happened, God would be taking care of us. She then told me she would be praying for him all night. She had thought she would be assigned to my husband for 3 nights, but apparently assignments changed. Every other nurse I had for 3 nights in a row. To me, this just makes the miracle more profound. It is the only night out of 30 he had a Catholic nurse. It also turned out she had just started attending St. Stephen's, my parish, a few months before.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. The morning of the 17th, I got a phone call from a nurse telling me that the doctor thought it would be good for me to come in. My first thought was that they would want to keep him. They wanted me to keep him calm while they tried to remove the ventilator, which they had tried to do a couple times before, even though they had told me before they would only let me in if he was dying. The doctor had given him a 50-50 chance of coming off the ventilator. It is very tricky to get someone off a ventilator, as they need the patient to cooperate with the doctor, and many patients panic and overbreathe the vent. This causes their oxygen levels to plummet, so they have to put the patient back under. The doctors can't remove the ventilator when the patient is asleep because they need to know if the patient can maintain a good oxygen level on their own first. Inserting the ventilator is dangerous and can cause a lot of damage, and if the doctors remove it too soon, then they have to reinsert it. The nurse had to explain to me that they were calling me as they had had an incident that is a bit graphic in nature, so I won't describe it, and they thought he was dying. She told me 2 people can come in for 15 minutes. I felt that his mom had to be that second person, so I called her. I was heartbroken that they wouldn't let anyone else in. My mother-in-law chose to have that second person be Jeff's dad. They lived about 45 minutes from the hospital, and there was no way I was going to wait. My son needed to drive me, as I wasn't in any shape to do that. So I had to leave my 23-year-old daughter with my 17-year-old, and my 23-year-old was left to make all the phone calls to her siblings. I grieved leaving them behind, but all I could think of was to get to the hospital before Jeff died. When I entered the hospital, the nurse asked why I was alone, and I said, "You said only 2 people could come in, and his dad is an hour away." And then she said, "No, everyone can come in, but only 2 at a time." So I asked them to call Father and also my son, who was in the parking lot. The doctor was trying to explain to me what happened, but I wasn't listening. I kept looking in the window of the room my husband was in, thinking, just let me go in. I think the doctor finally realized I wasn't hearing a word. My son came up, and we were together for a bit, and we said some prayers and talked to Jeff, though I don't know if he heard us, though I do think now he knows what we said. I asked the nurses if I could stay with Father, who arrived very quickly, and they said yes. He gave my husband last rites again, and then prayed all the prayers for the dying. At that point, I had been in for almost an hour. We needed to leave so others could go in. I think I was in a state of shock. So far, there wasn't any repeat of the incident the doctor had reported, and I begged God that none of my children or in-laws would witness it. They didn't. It never happened again. My in-laws arrived as we were leaving. As I got downstairs, the children in town were arriving, and my other 2 daughters were getting plane tickets. I had originally planned for my 17-year-old to go in with my 31-year-old son, but my 19-year-old wanted to go in with her. Actually, he was 29. He's 31 now. Oh. I didn't want to leave the hospital, but at the same time, I wanted to meet my children flying in. Actually, now that I think about it, that's right, because it was my second son. But anyway, yeah.
So she wanted to go in with
my 19-year-old wanted to go in with her, and my 23-year-old decided to go in with my 30. He was 31 because I got the boys mixed up for a second, but so my 25, because it's been almost 2 years, so their ages have all changed. Right. So I get mixed up.
So she went in with her sister, who was 23.
It's 21.
21.
So the 17 and she's 21 now. Sorry, 17 and 19.
Okay.
They were 17 and 19.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so she went in with her. Anyway, my 25-year-old arrived first from the plane, and I went into the hospital room with her, and then I was able to call my 27-year-old before she got on the flight. My 25-year-old, I wasn't able to because she was en route before I came out of the room.
I see.
Yeah. My 23-year-old had a little bit of a problem getting hold of my 27-year-old. And she also had 2 boys. So
I see.
Yeah, I had to wait for Dad to get home and all those things. I was able to call my 27-year-old and have her ask the stewardess to put her on the plane first and let her off first, which they did. They asked everybody to stay seated.
Good.
And she was able to get off first. So both my girls ran through the airport to the car. There's so much grief as a parent because I was not only grieving for my husband, but also for each of my children having to go through this. There is a lot of the story I can't tell because it is their story. The next morning, the weekend doctor called in and pressured me to remove life support. He said my husband would never come out of a long-term care facility, and at this point, that he would have all kinds of brain damage. I fell apart at that point. My 29 and 27-year-old took the phone out of the room to continue talking to the doctor, while my 25-year-old just held me. To be fair, my 29-year-old said that that's not what he heard, but both me and my 27-year-old, that's what we heard him say. We called Father, and he put us in touch with a Catholic doctor who said there was no possible way the doctor could know that. I had made it through Friday, but that day on Saturday I was a wreck. I hadn't slept in days and had barely eaten. All day long I had to have one of my children holding me. I would think I could go to sleep and would send them out, and then about 5 minutes later would call another child in. At one point, one of my daughters told me that in Mass the day before, this verse had come into her head. A little while, and then you will not see me. And again, in a little while, you will see me. I wasn't ready to think that that meant Jeff would die, but that perhaps it meant we would see him after he came off the ventilator. I forgot the rest of the verses because I go to the Father, and she did not say that part. We had been at daily Mass as soon as I recovered from COVID, sitting in the back row with a phone on buzz in case the hospital called. We would also leave before the last prayers in order not to have to speak to anyone, as that was too painful at that point. 16 years before, we had moved in order to be 3 miles from the parish, and the hospital was also very close. I wasn't able to take any of the doctor's phone calls for the next week, and my 29-year-old son took over. The doctor we liked back on Monday told my son there was no way they could say my doctor had, there was no way they could say my husband had brain damage or would be in a facility the rest of his life. He did say he would probably need oxygen and a wheelchair the rest of his life, but even then there was a possibility of him recovering from that too. He did say his chances of survival had dropped to 15%.
Wow.
As time drug out, I started taking phone calls again from the doctor and answering some emails and text. We were on an emotional roller coaster with good news followed by bad news, sometimes on the very same day. He had a heart incident, and then a few days later another one. His liver started failing, and one night at 11 p.m. the doctor told me I could go back in just in case. They were having trouble keeping his blood pressure steady. Since it was so late at night, I didn't call anyone, and just my son and I went in. The nurse never came in to kick us out, so after an hour I told my son to go home, that I needed at least him to be functioning the next day. I stayed the whole night, and his nurse would come in and tell me miracles happen, and he also brought me a blanket. After the head nurse came on in the morning, she was irate that I had been there all night and said I was only supposed to be in there 15 minutes. I had seen my husband's doctor come in, the one we really liked. We had been able to meet him before, and was able to get her to let me stay until he gave me an update. How long we could stay always depended on the head nurse, and some kept the letter of the law and others didn't care. Most of the time they wouldn't let us in at all.
Wow.
The week all my children were in town, my oldest daughter organized my children into a big cleanup in the yard and house, trying to prepare for whatever may come. I continued this after they left, as focusing on a project was a break from the constant grieving and worry. And in the process, I found an essay my husband had written on suffering back when he was in Bible college. I read half of it that day. At his funeral, we handed out a page of excerpts from it that one of his friends helped me put together. We asked for Father's approval first, and he said he thought it was beautiful, and we definitely should hand it out. Father gave an incredible, comforting, and beautiful homily at the funeral mass, too. It has over 1,500 views on YouTube now, and I highly recommend it to anyone who is grieving. On September 29th, the nurse noticed my husband was waking up a bit and asked him if he could give him a thumbs up. He said my husband gave him 2 big thumbs up.
Wow.
This reminded me of how my husband never did anything by halves. He always gave everything. The next day, he was briefly awake again, and that time the doctor was there. He followed all of the doctor's instructions, moving each of his fingers and toes when asked. So much for there being any brain damage.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. On the 2nd of October, my husband had a 3rd heart incident, and I frustratingly complained to God, "Why are you keeping him here if you are just going to take him?" Later that day, when I talked to Father, I told him I was worried my husband could have had a moment of despair when he was awake. And Father asked me to call and ask the nurses if he could come in and give him last rites again. So I did. The minute he arrived at the hospital, security told him to go on up. And when usually he had to do a COVID test first. When he walked into the ICU, a family was there and asked him, "Are you a Catholic priest?" And when he said yes, they asked him to give their loved ones last rites.
Wow.
They had just been called in to say goodbye.
Oh, wow.
When Father told me this, I knew this was my answer. I later joked that my husband was even trying to get people into heaven when he was unconscious. My husband was always trying to convince people of the truths of the Catholic faith and was instrumental in helping a few people come into the church and also return to the faith. On October 5th, my husband was put on dialysis, and hope was dwindling. In the early morning hours of October 7th, the Feast of the Holy Rosary, my husband had a fourth heart incident, and they had to put him on the fourth and final heart medication they had the option of using. This medication pulls the blood from the extremities in order to keep the heart pumping. In my heart, I knew he was dying. I ended up finishing the essay on suffering he wrote that day. Something told me I needed to finish it.
Take your time.
Okay. So that evening, our favorite doctor called and said the dialysis wasn't working. And he would be very surprised if my husband could survive at this point. We needed a 100% chance of no survival to be able to turn off the machines, so we called the Catholic doctor we had been in contact with, and he told us there was 0% chance my husband could survive. Jeff's parents were already at our house, and my son, actually everyone was there that lived in town. And my son called my 3 daughters to see if any of them wanted to fly in again. All of them chose not to, as they had said their goodbyes before, and they knew they would need to fly in for the funeral. We called Father, and he promised to meet us at the hospital. It was Jeff's parents, his sister, 2 of my sons, myself, and Father there at his bedside. Father, so at that point they let everybody in at you could have more than 2. Father gave Jeff last rites a 4th time, and then he gave him the apostolic blessing, also called the apostolic pardon. One of my sons that was there later told me he had never heard of the apostolic blessing and was surprised he hadn't, as he had done 4 years of Catholic theology in college. He told me to be sure to talk about it in this interview. If you haven't heard of it, take a look at the link in the comments. So then Father started praying the prayers for the dying, and we gave the signal to the nurses to start turning off the machines. Jeff was gone before they had the chance to turn everything off. His heart gave out as soon as they turned off his heart meds. The ventilator was the last thing they turned off and removed. I remember one line, particularly from the prayers that Father was saying, and just recently he sent me a copy. The part I remember is in this paragraph. Open the heavens to him, and let the angels rejoice with him. Into thy kingdom, O Lord, receive thy servant. May Saint Michael the Archangel, the chief of the heavenly host, conduct him. Let the holy angels come out to meet him and carry him to the city of the heavenly Jerusalem. Our pastor made what would have been only a horrific experience to one where he pulled back the veil and we could see into the next life, with all the angels and saints and Jesus and Mary waiting for my husband. It was horrible and beautiful at the same time. My last conversation with Jeff was a very difficult one, as he was having so much trouble breathing and was in a lot of pain. It was very hard for him to breathe and talk. He asked me to check on the life insurance. So I think he knew he could die. I told him I wish I was there with him, and he told me he wished he was too, that he was with me. I told him it was very hard to say, "Thy will be done," right now, and he said, "We have to." I then told him I love you over and over and over again, and told him to try not to talk. And then I said goodbye. It had been my husband's and my plan to move to Rathdrum, Idaho, onto our friend's property the following May. 2 months after my husband died, I decided I would keep this plan. Initially, I had thought I wanted to stay in Sacramento with everything familiar around me, but the memories were just too painful, and our neighborhood had become more and more dangerous. Homeless people had moved behind my back fence, and we had new neighbors move in on a street on another street kind of to the side of us, behind us, who were constantly playing screaming music, and the smell of marijuana was constantly coming over our fence. We had already been dealing with rap music and people screaming profanity at each other for 3 years from one of our next door neighbors. Just last week, I was told that in the news there was a shooting in the court across from ours where a woman was injured.
Oh my gosh, wow. Wow.
There is something called post-traumatic growth syndrome. I actually felt powerful after my husband's death. I had gone through one of the worst things I could imagine, and I had survived. I think the other reason I felt powerful was because I was surrounded with the love of those at my parish and other friends, and all of them expressing that love through all their acts of service and their prayers and masses said for my husband and our family. These acts of love were very healing to all the deep wounds from my childhood. As Pope Benedict XVI wrote, "Man is that strange creature that needs not just physical birth, but also appreciation if he is to subsist. If an individual is to accept himself, someone must say to him, 'It is good that you exist.' Must say it not with words, but with that act of the entire being that we call love." Perhaps some of the strength I had was also from shock. My youngest child is truly what kept me getting up each day. Without her, I think I may have just stayed in bed and cried for a year. My other children had to go home within a week after the funeral, so it was down to her and I. I started on the humongous task of getting rid of 90% of what we owned, which was a lot. My husband had lots of hobbies. We were both readers, and I had been collecting children's literature for years. We easily had over 1,000 children's books, along with all our homeschool literature. My husband and I together had around 4,000 to 5,000 apologetic and spiritual reading books.
Oh my gosh.
He still had all his Protestant books from Bible college. I also attended Bible college for a year. He kept his for reference because he wanted to write a book someday refuting them.
Oh, cool.
So he kept them. Every room of our 990 square foot home had bookshelves in it, and we had built wall-to-wall bookshelves in a little office we had built inside our wood shed in the backyard. My husband also enjoyed backpacking and carpentry. We had All Saints Day booth materials and many boxes of magic supplies he had collected during his years as working as a clown. It was truly amazing. My house was empty, painted, and all necessary repairs finished by April 22nd when it went on the market. It was also due to the generosity, it was all due to the generosity of parishioners at St. Stephen's, some other friends, and work my children came in and did. Every week there were volunteers helping me sell stuff, take stuff to the dump, and even paint my shed. Some of them were people I had never met. I also had some generous friends who had a trailer who offered to drive stuff up to Idaho. I kept 300 children's books and about 100 spiritual reading books. My bookshelves, some kitchen stuff, not very much. Everything else was gone as I knew my daughter and I were moving into a home with another widow on my friend's property, and there wasn't much room. I arrived in Idaho the last week of May. My youngest daughter would follow a couple of months later after finishing a job she had in Sacramento. My housemate went on vacation a few days after I arrived, and I was alone for the first time after my husband passed away. And I thought, oh my goodness, what did I just do? And I fell apart for several weeks. It took a while to adjust, but I was constantly stunned at the beauty right outside my door and every time I drove anywhere. After we had been in Idaho for 4 months, my youngest had a deeper conversion to the faith. I asked her what she thought had caused it, and she said, "Mom, it was getting out of the ghetto and that culture." On the farm, there are 3 houses. My friends own one, their daughter and husband and children live in another, and we are in the one in the middle. We are surrounded by devout Catholics. She also said a homily she heard on recollection and meditation had a lasting effect on her. Now I know at least one reason why God called us up here, and we will see what he has in store for us next. So I have some practical advice for the end. Do you have time for
Yeah.
it?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Yep.
All right. So practical advice. So you need life insurance. Please get life insurance.
So I actually was approved for my life insurance when I was in the hospital dying.
Oh.
That day.
Wow.
My husband got a call and they're like, "Yeah, you've been approved." And I'm like, "Okay, great.
Good,
We're covered,
good.
man."
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
So
life
important.
insurance.
So important. I put multiply what, this is my own advice. I didn't look this up, but
Yeah.
and other people might have other advice. Multiply what you spend in a year by at least 3. And that's what you need to have if you don't already have it in savings. This will give your spouse time to grieve without also being completely stressed on how he or she is going to take care of things. We always thought my husband needed to carry more than I did. But if you think of what it costs to hire a nanny for a year, this might just not be the case. It might actually be more. If you need a house cleaner on top of your nanny. So professional nannies make around $18 an hour in Idaho for 1 child. You can find one for less, but they aren't going to be highly qualified. In Seattle and Sacramento, the cost is around $25 to $30 an hour. Also, burials are expensive, around $15,000 in California. Jeff and I had talked about some things, but we were not very prepared. I knew we had a pension and life insurance, but I didn't know where the papers were. My kids and I spent hours searching through paperwork. We did find them. I didn't have a list of passwords to his email. It's important to have everything in one file folder and make sure at least 2 people know where it is. When I went to notify the credit card companies of Jeff's death, I discovered I was listed as secondary and not joint. I suddenly had no credit rating.
Oh, man.
We did know to always write in and or with both our names on our car titles, and that made selling them much easier. So you write and or and both your names.
Mm-hmm.
Our bank account was also joint, which is very important. I did make the mistake of taking my husband's name off of our account too soon. Checks came in his name for over a year as I sold my house and had reimbursements from utility companies, etc. I was able to get them deposited, but it was a bit of a hassle. We had always both said we wanted to be buried as cheaply as possible, but didn't talk about how to do this. I later discovered that caskets can be ordered and delivered for much cheaper than you would find at a funeral parlor. You don't have to choose one from the funeral parlor where the body is sent. You don't have to choose one. You also don't have to choose a headstone right away. Don't let the cemetery push you into making a decision. You should wait. And I did wait, and I looked around the cemetery and saw what was lasting.
Yeah.
And what looked good after many years.
Right.
But when I went in, I said, "Oh, I want one that looks like this." And he said, "Oh, well, we changed the materials," and it didn't click in my head.
Oh.
So I thought I was choosing material that didn't need upkeep. I can't say that word.
No, that's
didn't
okay.
need
Upkeep.
Yes. But I was wrong. So yeah, you're supposed to clean it every month and put like furniture polish oil on it every month. And
oh wow,
I moved away, so
right.
that falls to other people that stayed in town.
Wow.
So
that's interesting because my family members are buried up here, and we haven't done anything like that.
Yeah. Well,
that
and you might
of.
have the good material, because I
Yeah.
saw ones from 50 years ago
Right.
that looked totally fine. And, I don't think anybody's coming in
Doing
because
that.
they all look the same in that area. Of
Right.
the
What
cemetery.
material was it? Do you remember?
I don't know.
I can ask my
Yeah.
sister, because she's
yeah.
she's a mortician.
Yeah.
Or studying to be.
Yeah. So, it would have also helped to know what my husband wanted written on his memorial cards and on his tombstone. We did our best from what we knew. Just a reminder about the links in the description again. There is one to an end-of-life planner. There are lots of different ones, but I felt this one had the best reviews. I need to take my own advice and purchase it for myself.
Yeah.
And that's what I have written.
Okay.
So,
That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, Teddy and I have had to talk about end of life stuff quite a bit. Sorry, I'm just cleaning up those papers for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had to talk about it. I mean, I had to write out everything that I wanted for like my funeral and
Wow.
my casket. And I mean, when
Right.
it was nice, well, nice in quotes, like that I had that situation,
Right.
because it opened up that dialogue so quickly in our marriage. And I think that should be for everybody. Have an advance directive at the hospital, have your
Right.
will, because we're all mortal.
Right.
But
Right.
it's beautiful that you were more concerned with his soul. You did everything that you could you did your job, as a
Thank you.
wife,
Yeah.
to get him to heaven. That's our
Yeah.
job. And regardless of whether you're Catholic or Protestant or whatever, like,
Yeah.
that's our job, is to help each other get to heaven, but especially for a spouse. And so
Yeah.
you did your job, and you
Yeah.
did your due diligence for him. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And our pastor was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was his name? Did he give you permission? I mean,
I didn't. I'll leave his name out. But if
okay.
if people go to
Yeah.
listen to the homily, they'll figure
they'll
out
figure
who
it out.
is.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Yeah. In St.
So.
Stephen's, I mean, I've been there before, just once, but I have a ton of friends that have been there, and were there for a long time, and it's such a beautiful community.
It's an amazing community. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm so overwhelmed with all that was given to us.
Right.
And we had so much food, and like for a long time.
Yeah.
There was one lady that kept bringing food.
Yeah.
For like 2 months, like every week she'd drop off food.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And another lady kept helping me come over and clean things out.
Right.
One lady really helped, and she's like, take pictures or a video of before after, because I would be working all day trying to get stuff out, and it wouldn't look to me like there was progress.
Right.
Because we had like our sheds were like full from top to bottom.
Right.
You could barely walk through them.
Wow.
And one of them was like 300 square feet.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
Wow.
they were very full. And watching the video, like I started doing videos. I did like a little, maybe I'll do a vlog someday
Sure.
of my getting out of this house.
Yeah.
But it really helped me to rewatch it and go, oh, yeah, there's 3 empty shelves. Okay. Because all I would see what needed to be done rather than what I had done.
Right. And I mean, you're grieving too. I mean,
right. Yeah.
Everything, your world was kind of falling apart, so it's hard to see. It's hard to see the progress and the positive in that. And so, I get it.
And it was honestly amazing. Like the pictures when the house went up for sale, I'm like, wow, that looks really good.
Yeah.
One lady brought in a whole bunch of youth group kids. And,
wow.
like worked on my yard for like 5-6 hours.
That's
all of the
amazing.
kids. Yeah.
Wow.
Because my yard was huge. We
Right.
had almost a quarter of an acre. We were on the back part of a court.
Oh wow.
And so it was a very, very small house, very big yard.
Right. Yeah.
So, and just because we were on that middle lot.
Yeah.
In the court.
Right.
So.
And I've seen your new place, actually, and it's beautiful. I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous.
Idaho is just I mean,
and lots of children on the property. There's like 8, and then if our next door neighbors have a party, their whole family equals like 30.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome up here, and I mean, I think just when an emergency happens, when something tragic happens, I feel like that brings communities together so closely.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
Yeah.
that happened.
Yeah. And so leaving, definitely, I'm still torn because I still have 2 sons and 3 grandchildren in Sacramento.
Oh, okay. They'll have to come up here?
Yeah. I'm hoping they're going to come visit.
Yeah.
I'm hoping my girls are going to come. They came last year.
Oh, cool.
So I had all 5 girls up here.
Yeah.
For about 4 days. That was nice.
Right. And I don't know if you mentioned it. Was it 2020 that your husband
It was
died?
2021.
2021.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It was right before his 60th birthday.
Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
61st birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was 60.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know
Oh,
it
you're
was
welcome.
hard. I know it was difficult, but you did a beautiful job. And we will put those links in the description and everything too.
Yeah.
And wow.
Okay.
That was an amazing story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Want to do the Hail Mary for moms?
Oh, yes, that's right. I know, I'm out of the saddle. It's been a couple months. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. And I want to remind everyone, please share this with all of your friends. And please subscribe and like this video. The more you like it, the more it'll pop up in people's feeds. So, yeah, please just spread it as much as you can. All right. Thank you, everyone. God bless.